world. What I want to do in this short talk today is to give you some context, some concepts in oncogenesis that are relevant to the topic, and to give you some food for thought in relation to specific foods and the main target for action, as Donald has alluded to, which is the evident phenotype all around us of obese people. You do not have to have read this bestseller to know that this area is a bottomless pit of bad science and pseudoscience and misinterpretation of the existing limited science, even by mainstream media. And into this vacuum, myths and nonsense du jour by self-proclaimed nutritionists are allowed to promulgate, and these books fly off the shelf. However, apart from bad science, there are real difficulties in providing good science. First of all, most of the research to do with food and cancer is epidemiological, which sets hypotheses, and that is no substitute for the evaluation of the hypothesis, which is the randomized clinical trial, which is the gold standard. But how do you do a randomized trial on the number of tomatoes, for example, you take a day for a cancer that might take 20 years to develop? Secondly, in any nutrition study, there are so many confounding variables to do with weight, to do with lifestyle, and so on and so forth, and it's difficult to do good science. Thirdly, most of the work in this area has looked at the laboratory model and the experimental model in animals and looked at the various chemicals in foods, and some very interesting things have come up, but this does not necessarily prove anything in humans. Fourthly, and in contrast to the drug industry, for example, a new chemotherapeutic drug like Taxol would cost $1 billion to develop and would make $1 billion in its first year of patent, but there isn't a lot to be made out of patenting anything to do with broccoli or green tea. So there's less put into this type of science. And finally, we live in a reductionist world. We're all looking for a simple pill or a simple mechanism, whereas truly, for the vast majority of things, there is no simple solution. And all of us, clever people, believe stupid things. What is unassailable is that obesity is with us, and even in this country, this is a major problem, as Donald has indicated. And the incidence of overweight and obesity is now 61% in the adult population in this country. And there is a strong association between high BMI, and these are BMIs on the x-axis here, so 30 is obese, and a number of cancers, in particular esophageal cancer, womb cancer, postmenopausal breast cancer, and a number of others, and that is unassailable. And at this time, the Center of Disease Control in the United States would view that diet and obesity are a significant influence on up to 35% of all cancers. What are the concepts that connect diet and obesity with cancer? And I know many of you are doctors and scientists and so on, but pardon me if I'm just giving you easy stuff that you already know. The first concept is angiogenesis, and Judah Folkman, who was a Harvard pediatric surgeon in the early 1970s, came up with the concept that for any cancer cell to develop from being in a dormant or a benign tumor to become a malignant tumor, it needed to attract to itself new blood vessels, neovascularization, angiogenesis. And even up to his death last year, he promulgated the idea that many of us have dormant cancer. 30% of women of 50 have a dormant breast cancer cells. 30% of men have dormant prostate cancer cells. 80 to 90% of the population have thyroid cancer. But what triggers the promotion and progression of that may differ depending on the battle between the pro-angiogenic and the angiogenic influences that we all have. So his thesis was published in the early 1970s, and he was ridiculed by peers and the scientific community. And in 1989, the key element of that, which is VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, was cloned. And now we have wonderful drugs such as Avastin that are used to great effect. And this is the anti-cancer therapy of the future in clinical trials and practice. And the connection here is that some of the foods that we'll talk about have been shown in the laboratory and in experimental models to have significant influence on angiogenesis. The next concept, which is fundamental, is the seed and soil. Initially developed by Sir James Paget, trying to wonder why breast cancer in women, this is over 100 years ago, had a predilection, for example, for bone, and came up with the theory that there must be something in the bone, which is the soil or the stroma, that supports it. The modern champion of that is Isaiah Fiedler, and he has really worked out that certain clones of cells, for example, colon cancer cells in the liver might provide nutrition or factors or influences through the immune system or through inflammatory pathways that will promote the survival of those clones and allow that. So it's specific to the soil. And again, this concept is important in the mindset to go with this type of talk. Third concept is the fact that inflammation is very important in cancer and may underlie 20 to 30% of cancers. And for many different types of cancers, for lung cancer, with asbestos, and obviously with tobacco, infections like for stomach cancer and for liver cancer, reflux inflammation, Barrett's esophagus for esophageal, and so on, there's a clear connection between inflammation and cancer. Without going through this into any detail, but all these factors that are relevant to inflammation are also relevant to cancer. They're also relevant to wound healing and have a huge amount of influences in them, including food factors and dietary factors. And one of them that has particularly of interest for me is the NF-kappa B, which is a transcription factor, which is really a huge focus of attention in the industrial world, in the pharmaceutical world now, because this is really something that sets off so many pathways, including inflammation, angiogenesis, tumor promotion and proliferation, and interestingly, some of the foods and nutrients that are interesting can inhibit the action naturally of NF-kappa B. Finally, in terms of concept, is the fact that obesity, you should be viewed as inflammation. It is inflammation. And in terms of that model of obesity and inflammation and tumorigenesis, it's better to be a pear than an apple. And the bad fat is the belly fat. Okay, it's that fat around the omentum. That's the bad fat. And the expression of this problem in our society is that many patients have this inflammatory condition known as the metabolic syndrome, where they've high glycerols, high blood pressure, diabetic sort of profile, and this is increasingly common in our society and represents an inflammatory process. And what's happening immunologically, very simply, is when I was a medical student, and even 10 years ago, this belly fat, if you like, was considered just an inert blob, whereas modern science will tell us that it is far from that, and it's a very rich, dynamic milieu of bad stuff. Okay, active macrophages, active T cells, and producing loads of things, leptin, growth factors, lots of things that can promote cancer development and inflammation. Amongst that would be insulin, which of itself can promote tumor growth, and insulin resistance, all of which can increase the bioavailability of estrogens and androgens, and we know how important they are for prostate cancer and breast cancer, and all of which may promote angiogenesis, inflammation, and so on. So this is the important concept linking diet, nutrition, obesity, and modern understanding of oncogenesis.